In a dark gallery of the Denisova cave in Siberia, scientists found a bone. It was small, a fragment from a young person's skeleton, small enough to hold in one hand. For decades, this cave had been yielding secrets, but this particular fragment carried one they never expected. When they read its DNA, they discovered something that should not exist. The owner of this bone had a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. Not a distant mixing of bloodlines over thousands of years, a first-generation hybrid, a child born directly to two different species of human. She was about 13 years old when she died, somewhere in the mountains of Siberia, roughly 90,000 years ago. She had a name given to her by the scientists who found her, Denny. Denny is the proof of something almost too strange to hold on to. At the same time our ancestors were living on this planet, so were other humans. Real people, with tools, with families, with children. So here is the question Denny's bones force us to ask. Who were they? How many different kinds of human walk the earth? And out of all of them, why is only one kind left? If you want the wrong answer, look at the classic picture. A line of figures, hunched to upright, ape to caveman to us, each one stepping neatly onto the shoulders of the last. A march of progress, one species handing the baton to the next. That picture is a lie. Human evolution was not a ladder. It was a bush. A branching tangle of experiments, some of which survived for millions of years, most of which went extinct. And the very first thing this bush produced was not a bigger brain. It was a pair of legs. About 7 million years ago, the lineage that would lead to us split from the one that leads to chimpanzees. The earliest candidate for a human ancestor, Sahelanthropus, walked the grasslands of Chad. Its brain was no bigger than a chimpanzee's, but its spine connected to its skull in a way that tells us it stood upright. Millions of years passed. The bush kept branching. Oran in Kenya, Ardipithecus in Ethiopia, still able to climb, but already built to walk.
Then came the Australopiths. The most famous of them is Lucy, a skeleton from East Africa, 3.5 feet tall. She walked the savannah on 2 legs. She left footprints in volcanic ash, preserved in stone, that look exactly like the footprints of a person walking across a beach today. The Laetoli footprints, 3.6 million years old, and utterly human. But Lucy's brain was barely a third the size of ours, and her fingers were curved, made for climbing, because beneath her waist she was a biped, and above it she was still partly a tree dweller. The Australopiths were not trying to become us. They were simply making a living. And somewhere in this family, one branch made a different bet entirely. Around 2.7 million years ago, a group called Paranthropus decided that the future was not about brains. The future was about chewing. They evolved massive jaws, teeth the size of small rocks, coated in thick enamel, muscles anchored to ridges on top of their skulls, a crest of bone, so they could bite down on the toughest vegetation on Earth. It was an extraordinary specialization. It worked for over 1 million years.
And then it stopped working, because when the climate shifted, Paranthropus was locked in. It could only eat what it was built to eat. It couldn't adapt, and so it died out. Hold that in your mind. For 1 million years, Paranthropus was a successful experiment in human evolution. It had huge jaw muscles and a small brain, and none of that saved it. Around the same time Paranthropus was grinding its teeth in the East African forests, something else was stirring. About 2.8 million years ago, the first members of the genus Homo appear in the record, and for the first time, the bet changes. These are not just bipedal apes, they are tool makers. Homo habilis, the earliest of them, had a brain noticeably bigger than the Australopithecus, and it did something no hominin had done before. It used sharp flakes of stone to cut meat off carcasses and to crack open bones for the marrow inside. That is the moment the whole story tips, because meat is dense with energy and marrow is dense with fat, and energy is what a growing brain demands. Tools, meat, more food, more calories, and those calories go to the brain. The engine had been switched on. Then, around 1.9 million years ago, came Homo erectus, and with it, the body of a modern human. The Turkana-boy, the most complete early Homo skeleton ever found, stood well over 5 feet tall. Long legs, short arms, a narrow barrel-shaped chest. This is a body built for one thing, covering distance. Endurance running on open savanna, chasing down prey in the heat of the day when every other animal had given up.
Homo erectus was the first hominin to leave Africa. It walked into Georgia, into China, into the islands of Southeast Asia. It made hand axes, symmetrical stone tools so carefully crafted that they remained essentially unchanged for 1,000,000 years. It controlled fire. It built campfires, cooked food, and cooked food feeds a large brain with less effort. Homo erectus survived for nearly 2,000,000 years, longer than any other species of human. And by the time it was spreading across Eurasia, it was no longer alone. The world was filling up with people. Different people. And here is where the story stops being simple. For a long time, scientists treated the middle of the human story as a single crowd, one broad species, an ancestor in waiting that would eventually give rise to Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Asia, and modern humans in Africa. They called it Homo heidelbergensis. One name, one bucket, everyone dumped their fossils into it. But the fossils did not agree.
Ancient DNA pulled from a cave in Spain, from bones over 400,000 years old, showed that the people of Europe were already becoming Neanderthals. They were not a common ancestor, they were a separate line, already split from ours. The name Heidelbergensis had become a wastebasket, and every interesting fossil in the world had been thrown into it. In 2021, scientists finally tried to fix it. They proposed a new name for the African branch, the population that sits directly on the road to us. They called it Homo bodoensis, after a skull found in Ethiopia, 600,000 years old. Massive face, brain volume at the high end of the range, and a mysterious detail, cut marks across the skull made after death, deliberately. We don't know what they mean. The point is not the name. The point is what the name reveals. Our direct ancestors were a distinct group of people with their own face, their own history, their own species. And around them in the same era, a whole world of other humans was living. Let's meet them. In Europe, the Neanderthals. They had brains that were on average larger than ours, barrel-shaped chests, stocky bodies, and short limbs, built to hold heat against the cold of an ice age. They made sophisticated stone tools, hunted megafauna, used fire, created pigments and ornaments, and buried their dead. They carried a version of the gene associated with speech. Some of them had pale skin and red hair, an adaptation to the weak northern sun. In Siberia and across Asia, the Denisovans. We know them mostly from a finger bone and a few teeth, and from their genes. They were so adapted to the high mountains that they carried a variant of a gene, EPAS1, that lets blood cope with thin air at altitude. A gene that would later be passed down tens of thousands of years later to the people of the Tibetan Plateau. And then there were the ones that should not have worked at all. On the island of Flores in Indonesia, a team of scientists in 2003 found a skeleton that stood barely a meter tall, an adult, with a brain the size of a grapefruit. They named it Homo floresiensis, and the world called it the Hobbit. By every rule of the old story, this species should not have existed. A human being walking upright on an island with a brain 1/3 of ours, and yet it survived there for over 600,000 years.
It made stone tools. It used fire. It hunted pygmy elephants called stegodon. It was small because it lived on an island with limited food, and evolution had shrunk it down. Insular dwarfism. Not a failure, an adaptation. A similar species, Homo luzonensis, lived on the island of Luzon in the Philippines with curved fingers and toes, half ape, half human, as recently as 67,000 years ago. And deep in a cave in South Africa, in a chamber so narrow that scientists had to crawl on their stomachs to reach it, they found something stranger still. Dozens of bodies. A species called Homo naledi, with a small brain, primitive shoulders, curved fingers, and modern hands and feet. And those bodies had been placed in that dark chamber, one after another, deliberately, by a species with a brain the size of a chimpanzee's.
Which raises a question we still cannot answer. Did they understand death? Did they mourn? For 200,000 years or more, this was the state of the world, a planet crowded with humans, Neanderthals on the ice, Denisovans in the mountains, dwarfs on the islands, hominins in the caves, and somewhere in Africa, a new kind of human was forming, Homo sapiens, us. We appeared around 300,000 years ago with a high, rounded skull, a face that no longer jutted forward, and a chin no other human species ever had. For a long time, we simply stayed in Africa, sharing the continent with others. Then we left. In waves. And when we walked out into the world that was already full of people, we did not find empty lands. We found our cousins. And this is where Denny, the girl from the cave, becomes the center of the story again. Because when modern humans spread across Eurasia, they did not simply wipe out the Neanderthals and Denisovans. They met them. And in some places, they mated with them. Denny's bones prove that different species of human could produce children together. And modern DNA proves it happened a lot more than once. Every person alive today outside of Africa carries between 1% and 4% Neanderthal DNA. It's in our immune systems, in our skin, in how we handle cold and infection. Indigenous people of Australia and Papua New Guinea carry up to 6% Denisovan DNA. And inside the genomes of many sub-Saharan Africans, there are traces of even older people,
ghost lineages, archaic groups we have never found in the fossil record. The old story said Homo sapiens conquered the world by being smarter and replacing everyone else. The evidence says something stranger. We absorbed them. We carried them with us.
The others did not completely vanish. They were folded into us, gene by gene, child by child. So why, in the end, were we the only ones left? Not because we had the biggest brains. We didn't. The Neanderthals did. What we had, as far as the record shows, was something else. Social connections that reached across distance. The ability to trade, to share, to form networks that could survive bad years. A flexibility that let us adapt to any environment we walked into instead of being locked into one. And we had the willingness to reach across the line that other species drew. To welcome the other into the family. The result is written in every one of us. Today, the bush has one standing branch, Homo sapiens. But the other branches did not die in vain, and they did not die clean. Their blood runs in the veins of everyone alive. Denny's mother was a Neanderthal, her father was a Denisovan, and somewhere in the tangle of human history, their granddaughter may have walked the same earth as our ancestors. Maybe she even carried their children. We are the last ones standing, but we were never the only ones, and we still carry all of them with us.